This is a special presentation of Farm Journal Television.
Today's farmers have high-tech equipment, from tractors to GPS to the hybrids, fighting for every bushel. Here to help is agronomist Ken Ferry.
There's definitely some things that we put into our systems pyramid.
And agronomist Missy Bauer.
So we're trying to create that true V trench.
And they're using the systems approach to higher yields on every acre. I'm Clinton Griffiths, and she's Margie Fisher. Together, we're Corn College TV.
Corn College TV, brought to you by Micro Essentials, the next generation of fertilizer designed to meet the needs of advanced farming technology. For more information, visit microessentials.com. And by Winfield, uncovering insights through data to help farmers be greater. Visit your local retailer or learn more at winfield.com.
Ken, part of the systems approach is taking a look back every year and keeping a history and looking at that history and what's been going on in our field. And we see a lot of different documents here that can really help us with that.
Yeah, it's part of record keeping, as far as keeping a record of your history and then being able to go back and relay that history to yields and that type of thing. And the more you collect, of course, the more you have to make management decisions on. So we start out with the simple soil tests. So
Sure.
We're going out there and we're collecting the soil fertility, and in this case we're doing it by soil type. So we're going to separate our sands from our silts from our clay loams, and we want to know what the base fertility is out there in that field itself. So that's kind of the starting point. Then we have all other kinds of data collection that we can do, from aerial imagery to probably the number one is the yield map. So we can come out here and we can take this yield data. Once we get that yield data and we overlay the soil type lines on top of that, so we can collect that yield data first, then we can overlay the soil lines on top of that and see, is there zones or management zones out here that need to be attended to. We could do the same with the aerial imagery. So we take aerial image shots and then we lay over our management zones on it and see if they need to be manipulated or whatever. But we also need to, in history, keep track of our weather.
Right.
So the most valuable years to look at when we're processing data from the yield monitor or from aerial imagery is your wet years and your dry years, because the dry years tell us where our light soils are and where we get in trouble. The wet years tell us where our high risk soils are and where drainage is more needed. So just looking at the map, if you don't have detailed records to say, here's my rainfall, here's what happened, then when you go back and you can look at 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 years back, to remember what it actually is.
Right.
So the history becomes a big part of what we do, is try to design, how am I going to manipulate this field to try to fix some of those areas. I need to know how they're going to act on a dry year and a wet year, especially when things like nitrogen management and variable rate, or plant densities and variable rate population. This year a lot of farmers are disappointed because of the drought, and they may not want to calibrate their yield monitor. This is the year it has to be calibrated, because we want to find these poor yields out there and have the map explain them to us.
Definitely. How much of our time should be spent doing this? We always think of ourselves as farmers out in the field trying to grow a better crop, and our work's outside. But how much time should we really be putting into this information?
There needs to be a considerable amount of time, and of course after harvest, where we sit down and we process all that data. I'm a big believer, if you don't give yourself a good evaluation, you're not going to change anything from next year. One of the things that I've found is that when we bring our customers together to evaluate the year-end data, I want to have the guy that ran the corn planter there, I want the guy that run the combine, the guy that did the spraying. I want everybody in that room so they can put input into it, because sometimes you see things on here that don't make sense. And the guy says, oh, I changed a hybrid there, or I didn't spray that part, that type of thing, and it adds to it. So we're making notes like crazy on here. I wish I could just put this in a computer and it would crank it out and tell me what it is. But it takes men sitting around or farmers sitting around and drawing out what they think those issues are. And then we go out and ground truth that for the next year. If we have aerial imagery, we can ground truth it in that actual growing season if we want.
Right.
Still ahead, using records to avoid disaster. But up next, we're making maps at planting time.
It's time to demand more. With Micro Essentials, you get more from every acre. Through our fusion technology, only Micro Essentials combines 4 vital nutrients into one powerful granule, ensuring uniform nutrient distribution and increased nutrient uptake. The innovation behind our fusion technology means you'll grow stronger, healthier plants. Micro Essentials. Get more from every acre.
You don't just see a field. You see the future of your operation. One we're helping you protect. Enlist is a new herbicide-tolerant trait system that will build on glyphosate, improving performance to move farming ahead.
There's a lot of new things out here today as far as technology goes and integrating them into how we keep track of field records and what we've done in the different fields. One of the examples that we have here today is an actual iPad that was collecting data live while we were planting across the field. So Leon, what are some of the things that we're actually capturing while we planted this corn?
Well, we've got, it captures obviously population, and then it starts to look at the corn planter itself. Singulation, spacing, the ride, ground contact, a variety of things that we struggle with in this area. I think the number one thing that we probably struggle with that guys don't realize is ground contact, having consistent contact so that your seed depth is controlled perfectly across the field. We get up into a section like this, we came out here and looked at it, and we can see that we've got differentiations in corn plants and so forth, and it's just one other way to take a look at our fields and try and learn something about them.
And because we're actually collecting this data live while we're planting, it does give us an opportunity to make some adjustments. So we're in this spot here because it showed on our data that the ride of the planter wasn't as good, that it was doing more bouncing as it was coming through here. And you can see in this soil type that it's a soil type that's a little rougher, has more rocks in it, so we got more things that the planter's going to be bouncing over. In live retrospect, you know, what could we do seeing this data? What's a decision that we could make as we're planting? And it would be as we come up into a soil type like this, maybe we just slow the planter down, maybe a 1/4 mile an hour or a 1/2 mile an hour slower as we go through there to try to keep that good ride better. We get back down in that low ground and we could be back where we normally would, where we wouldn't see as many issues because of the types of soils. So it's a pretty neat ways of collecting some field records on the go with the technology kind of incorporated in there using an iPad.
Well, it definitely would depend a little bit on what this year's crop is and what you've done. If you're in a corn-on-corn situation, as we are here, and we have tile line that haven't run for over a year, our water table is pretty low. That makes corn-on-corn quite a bit more riskier because it takes a lot of water to raise corn, but takes even more water to raise corn-on-corn when we're dealing with allelopathic toxins and things like that. But if I have a soybean crop out there and I'm coming back with corn next year, I'm not going to be near as nervous. What I'm going to have to pay attention to are things like my herbicide program. What kind of herbicides do I have out there this year, and can I come back with a corn crop? Maybe I'm forced to stay with beans. And then the other issue would be crop insurance. Today it's not as risky when we're operating with crop insurance, but if you're in a situation where you don't have crop insurance and you don't have any water out there to grow a corn crop, then definitely go into a wheat or go into soybeans again. Soybeans on soybeans would be less risky than trying to handle a corn crop that takes quite a bit of water to pull off. So it's going to be a herbicide issue, it's going to be a crop rotation issue, and it's going to be, unfortunately, a crop insurance issue as far as how well are you covered for the potential for a back-to-back drought.
Corn College TV, brought to you by Avail Phosphorus Fertilizer Enhancer. Supercharge your phosphorus this fall with Avail to maximize the use of your fertilizer investment in the spring.
Supercharge your P with Avail Phosphorus Fertilizer Enhancer. Studies show that when you add Avail to your fall-applied phosphorus, you can see an average increase of 9.9 bushels of corn per acre. Avail reduces phosphorus fixation to promote more efficient P uptake to the crop for stronger roots, better overall plant health, and higher yields. Supercharge your P this fall with Avail Phosphorus Fertilizer Enhancer to maximize the use of your fertilizer investment in the spring. Ask your fertilizer dealer for details today.
There are 406 million acres of cropland in the U.S. Winfield is helping to make them work harder. Maybe the answer isn't a new product, but a new way of thinking. A way to turn data into something you can harvest, driving efficiency into every molecule. It's time to rethink what a business partner can be. It's time to be greater. Winfield.
Ken, there's a lot of things we can use records for, and one of them is to go back and figure out what happened this year after we've had a big disaster.
Yeah, we sit down and we go through literally thousands and thousands of acres of yield maps and aerial imagery and stuff like that, and a lot of times they're telling you something, but if you don't have the records kept behind it, you may not see it and you may miss it. And what you can learn from your yield maps and all the other data coming out of that field has to be tied to what was done. What's the past history out there? Could be from spray records to implementing tile and all the different things that you put out there itself. So the record keeping part may be a monotonous job to some extent, but everything has to be recorded and dated. It's getting easier today with iPads and iPhones and things like that you can make those records. Such as this field here. This is a yield map from 2010. And in 2010, we have an area of this field, the red here represents poor yielding. That's not yielding very well. And in this case, it happens to be the early onset of Goss's wilt, a bacteria that we have a problem with in corn on corn. When we come back and look at this area right here in 2011, we realize that in 2010, the hybrid that we had planted in there had a Goss's rating of 6 on a scale of 1 to 9, with 1 being excellent and 9 being poor. So it's kind of mid to back end of the pack,
Sure.
Low rating for the Goss's wilt itself. In 2011, this is an NDVI photo of this same field, and we're looking at the same area right here. And green means healthy corn, light yellow to red means stress. And we see that there's a strip in here that is dark green, and it's all the same hybrid. And the reality here is, we go back in our records, this had double tillage put to it. So what do you mean double tillage? Meaning in this case it was chisel plowed, and it was chisel plowed twice, and with the function of burying residue. Well, Goss's wilt carries over in the residue, and a situation where the less residue that you have, the less chance you have of bringing it forward to the next crop. In the actual yield in the end, where we did the double tillage, is almost 180 bushel corn in this area right in here versus 156. So
wow.
Here again, we didn't have a hybrid that could handle the Goss's wilt, but the double tillage. You wouldn't understand what that streak is in there if we didn't have a tillage record to show us what we're doing. This is another example in a field. This was in 2010. We have a planter that's got a susceptible Goss's wilt hybrid in half of it, and the other half of the planter has a resistant. And you can see there's quite a bit of difference in health between the resistant hybrid, or more resistant hybrid, and the susceptible. This is the last row of the resistant, and if we pull that away, we look into the susceptible hybrid.
Wow.
You can see the kind of damage that's being done.
Definitely.
Well, in this particular field in 2010, what we had on this half of the field was variety A, and it had a rating of 8, but the hybrid scale went from 1 to 9, 9 being best. So this was a high score for resistance to Goss's wilt. Variety B over here had a rating of 5 on a scale of 1 to 9, 1 being the best. So the scales aren't the same between the hybrids, but this is a weaker hybrid for Goss's wilt, and we had Goss's wilt show up in this area right here within this field. Now in the end, this hybrid over here made 189 bushel, well, this one made 194.
Right.
So this hybrid actually was the better hybrid in this field, even with the Goss's wilt. But when the grower didn't keep track of this and came back in 2011, he put one hybrid in the whole field, and this one hybrid had a rating of 5, again with a scale of 1 to 9, 1 being excellent.
Right.
He chose a poorer hybrid to Goss's wilt in the corn on corn. And if we look in the center of this map, we realize that the red means poor, green means good. There's a drastic difference, everything being the same, tillage, planting, hybrid, everything is the same. The only difference between this side and this side is this had a different hybrid a year ago that had strong Goss's wilt scores. This side had Goss's wilt. So we have the inoculant over here, even though this field has had tillage to it.
Right.
And this hybrid went 153 bushel, and the same hybrid over here went 136, 137. Right in here, there's almost 100 bushel difference that if we went back in time, realized that we had a problem here in Goss's wilt, we should have came back with a hybrid that had a higher score for Goss's wilt, or maybe stepped out and went to soybeans. But in a situation where we had the records in place, we just needed to look closer at them and to make that selection. And that's something that you just can't get too many records, I think, when you're going back and trying to put the pieces together.
And definitely go back in those records and evaluate and compare notes and figure out what you did differently or the same.
Yeah, and we have the tools now to do that between the yield maps and the aerial imagery and stuff like that, that can tell us so much, but we need the background, especially as an agronomist, we need the background when we sit down with those growers. What did we do out here that would be different? Now, this line was very distinct in the field during the growing season, and after we got out there, the farmer says, uh-oh, I know what the problem is. And then it showed up in the yield map as well.
Corn College TV is sponsored by the Enlist Weed Control System from Dow AgroSciences, a new herbicide and trait system that will build on glyphosate.
You don't just see a field. You see the future of your operation. One we're helping you protect. Enlist is a new herbicide-tolerant trait system that will build on glyphosate, improving performance to move farming ahead.
Over the generations, fertilizer, the unsung hero of the farm, has been in the background, quietly nourishing crops with very little fanfare. Until now. Meet the next generation of fertilizer, Micro Essentials.
Missy, we've heard that we need to collect these records and we need to have all this information, but what do we do with it, and how should we get started? You know, a lot of it we're doing already, I guess.
Yeah, I think probably the best way to, get started or just see where things are at is really evaluate what you have. Like, a lot of guys are actually collecting a fair amount of data and probably don't even realize it. A lot of our population monitors and planting monitors today are tracking hybrids. If we punch it in there as we start that field, it is tracking a lot of that information. It's tracking populations, so it does a lot of that for us. Yield monitors, another great thing, as far as it's collecting a lot of data actually for us as we're going across the field. It's also keeping track of things, the time of harvest, and you can also look at productivity of harvest and all those types of things too that maybe you hadn't thought about before either.
And it's just knowing how to use those tools, right? And making sure you go to the effort to look at it.
That's correct. So evaluate what you got is the best place to start. Also think about things as far as, like, soil tests. You've got that data, but have you brought it together and looked at it with some of this other data, in respect to your yield data? Maybe we've got a bad pH area, what's that doing with yield? And bringing those two things together. Spray records, that's something we're all required to keep anyways, but do we utilize those in our operation as far as helping to make decisions looking at all this data?
Sure. So where do we go from there? We've probably want to look at our hybrids as well and find out how they play into this information?
Yeah, think about hybrid placement, and I think it's really important to track, which hybrids in which field, or maybe even within the field if you're using multiple hybrids. This becomes really important when you think about things like disease management. So you got a certain hybrid that you know is more susceptible to a certain disease. When it comes time for scouting, that's where I'm going to scout first. Same thing comes into play when we think about insect management. Maybe you've got an insect trait resistance that does western bean cutworm in one hybrid, but another hybrid doesn't. Again, dials you in on your scouting practices. Where do I go first? Which acres need covered for this insect or this pest?
End of the year, we want to look at the yield data, right? And make sure we know what we're getting from this field, and then taking that and combining it with this other stuff.
Yeah, the yield data is still our grade card overall. So if we can take that yield data and start using it in combination with all these other things and that whole idea of that layering effect that we've talked about.
Sure. And each hybrid is going to be different. Is that right? Is that something that we need to be thinking about?
Yeah, you know, each hybrid will be different as far as what we can do in tracking it and the yields and how that all comes into play in general. So when we think about this, you know, we're collecting this data, how can we actually utilize it going forward? And I think that's where it becomes more powerful. So when we start to think about the idea of variable rate. So variable rate applications have gotten very popular amongst farmers, and a lot of people want to do it. If we do a good job of collecting some of this data, yield data, understanding our planting populations, hybrids, etc., we can do a better job creating management zones, and then which will lead us into variable rate. So now I have an opportunity to maybe variable rate apply not only my lime or dry fertilizer, but maybe it's planting populations, maybe it's even nitrogen. Sure. But in order to do that, the technology's there on the equipment side, I've got to have the agronomics behind it. Part of the agronomics behind all those variable rate decisions will come through our field records and keeping track of things.
Bottom line is you can look at it in one of two ways, as a hassle or as a tool. And it's making that decision that, you know what, this is actually going to drive what I do on the farm as opposed to just be another thing I do and collect.
Exactly. It's a hassle if you're collecting data and don't utilize it for anything. It's a tool if you're collecting data and you're using it to make management decisions. And that's what field history and records is all about.
Don't wait to get started on your new farm building. Call today and take advantage of discount pricing during our off-peak construction season sale. Building spots are limited, so contact your local sales office or visit our website.
Hey, what's going on?
Just checking the fields. Yours are looking pretty good. Must be doing something right.
Actually, I got a guy.
You got a guy?
Well, it's not just any guy. I got a Channel seedsman.
Channel, yeah?
Yeah, I've been working with him pretty close to get, well, you can see for yourself. This is what I'd recommend. Let's get to work. Now this is what you want to see.
Maybe I should get a guy.
Maybe you should get a Channel seedsman.
Find your Channel seedsman at channel.com. There are 406 million acres of cropland in the U.S. Winfield is helping to make them work harder. Maybe the answer isn't a new product, but a new way of thinking. A way to turn data into something you can harvest, driving efficiency into every molecule. It's time to rethink what a business partner can be. It's time to be greater. Winfield.
Aflatoxin, which is a toxin that gets in the corn typically in a drought year or a lot of kernel damage. And the aflatoxin comes from the Aspergillus mold, which is on here. It's a dull green mold on this plant, and that mold can get in here through the silk, because it can enter through the silk or can enter through any damaged kernel. And of course, a lot of times with drought corn, you have aborted kernels. So the Aspergillus mold gets the growing, and that can produce the mycotoxins that produce the aflatoxins. And aflatoxins themselves are a no-no in the food system, so we have to keep them out of our grains going into the food system, and they can't go to dairy cows or chickens as well. It can be used to some extent in different livestock such as the swine or the beef industry itself, but this aflatoxin is a mold that can grow in the field, and if it gets above 20 parts per billion, grain can be rejected. So we have to make sure we go out and do our scouting ahead of time, look for this mold on the ears and be looking for it, because this mold is hard to see once we put it in the grain tank and put it in the wagon. And the actual mold or the aflatoxin is inside the kernel, so we have to crush that kernel and put it under a light to see if it's in there. So it's a lot easier to detect in the field before harvest, going out there and shucking back ears and looking for it itself. We have to keep the aflatoxin grain separate from our good grain. We don't want to contaminate a bin by putting these together. This aflatoxin really ramps up as the corn moisture comes down. So when we get down in that 24 to 18% moisture is when we'll see the spread of the aflatoxin on the ear really take off.